James had never imagined that his life would take a turn like this. He had always been just an ordinary man, a mechanic who worked on Earth, fixing machines and living a simple life. But now, standing in the center of a vast alien palace, everything had changed. He couldn't help but feel out of place. The cold, polished stone beneath his feet, the towering walls adorned with glowing symbols, and the faint hum of unfamiliar technology all seemed to remind him that he was no longer on his home planet. This was a world far beyond anything he had ever seen, a world that was as alien as it was beautiful. The strange events that had led him here were still a blur. One moment he was working in his workshop, minding his own business, and the next, he found himself in the custody of beings from another galaxy. The details were hazy, but one thing was clear. He had been chosen for something. He didn't know why or what exactly was expected of him, but here he was, a human in the royal palace of an alien empire, facing the unknown. He had been led through the grand halls by one of the palace guards, their movements precise and controlled, as if they had rehearsed this path countless times. The atmosphere around him felt heavy, as though every inch of the palace was filled with history, power, and secrets. But there was no time to admire the palace's beauty. He had been told that he was to meet the alien queen and her daughter. The queen was a powerful ruler, someone who held the fate of countless worlds in her hands. James had no idea why he was summoned, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary meeting. As he walked down the hallway, his mind raced. He tried to recall the moments leading up to his arrival in the alien world, but they remained elusive. There had been whispers of a prophecy, something about a human playing a key role in the future of this galaxy, but he couldn't piece the details together. All he knew was that he had been brought here for a reason, whether he liked it or not. The guards led him to a massive door, intricately carved with symbols he couldn't understand. With a quiet hum, the door slid open, revealing a large, opulent room. The air was thick with the scent of unfamiliar flowers, and the space was filled with large, ornate furnishings that gleamed in the soft light. But it wasn't the room that caught his attention. It was the figure standing in the center of the room. Selara, the alien queen's daughter, stood there, and her posture regal and commanding. Her eyes were the first thing James noticed, eyes that were unlike any human eyes. They glowed a soft blue, shimmering with an intensity that made him feel as though she could see straight through him. She was tall, with an elegant yet fierce presence, and her long, flowing hair shimmered with an ethereal quality, as though it was part of the very air around her. She looked like someone who had been born to rule, and for a moment James felt out of place standing before her. But there was something else in her gaze, something that caught him off guard. Despite the power she radiated, there was a softness there, a curiosity, as if she were just as unsure about him as he was about her. "Welcome, human," she said, her voice soft yet commanding. The way she pronounced the word human was different, as if it were a foreign concept to her, something she had only recently come to understand. "I've been told much about your kind, but I've never met one before." James hesitated, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't used to being greeted by royalty, especially not by someone who wasn't even from his planet. Thank you," he said, his voice sounding strange in the quiet room. "I'm not really sure why I'm here, to be honest." Selara smiled faintly, the corners of her lips turning up. It was a smile that was warm, yet tinged with mystery. "You were brought here for a reason," she said. "I think you'll understand soon enough. There are many things we need to discuss." As she spoke, James couldn't help but notice how different she seemed from the imposing figures of royalty he had seen in movies or heard about in stories. She didn't carry herself with the arrogance or coldness he had expected. Instead, there was a quiet strength to her, a sense that she had seen much, but still sought understanding. There was a curiosity about her, a sense that she wanted to know who he was and what he could offer. "I don't know what you've been told about Earth," James said, trying to sound more confident. "But I'm just a guy. I don't know what I could possibly do for you." Selara's expression softened further. She stepped closer, her movements graceful and fluid, almost like she was floating rather than walking. "I've been told that humans are capable of extraordinary things," she said, "and that perhaps you are the one who can help us. You may not understand it yet, but your role here is important." James felt a wave of confusion wash over him. "And help you with what?" he asked, trying to steady his voice. I'm not sure what I can do. I'm not a soldier or anything special. I'm just..." "Human," Selara interrupted gently, her tone filled with quiet certainty. "You are more than just a man from Earth. You are the key to something much greater than you know. And it's time for you to understand what that means." Before James could ask more questions, the room suddenly grew still. The faint hum of the palace's energy systems seemed to pause, as though the entire building was holding its breath. The air felt charged, and in that moment, James realized that his life was about to change in ways he could not yet fathom. Whatever was happening, whatever had brought him here, he could no longer turn away from it. As James stood in the grand hall of the palace, his mind was racing. And everything around him was so unfamiliar, so far removed from anything he had ever known. He couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place, like an intruder in a world where nothing made sense. But Selara's presence was both calming and unsettling. There was a strength in her gaze that drew him in, and yet there was something about her that made him feel like he wasn't just another visitor. Her curiosity about Earth was genuine, and though she seemed to hold immense power, there was something unspoken between them, a silent understanding, a deep connection that James couldn't quite explain. As she gestured for him to follow, James hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and walked with her. Selara moved gracefully, each step deliberate, as if she were both aware of the weight she carried and at the same time, fully comfortable with it. There was no arrogance in her movements, no sense of superiority, only a quiet confidence that James couldn't help but admire. As they walked through the ornate hallways, he found himself wondering about the alien world he was now part of, how different it was from the one he knew, how much more advanced they were in their technology and culture. They arrived at a large window overlooking the city below. The lights of the alien metropolis shimmered in the distance, casting a soft glow on the buildings that stretched toward the sky. It was a breathtaking view, one that made Earth seem so far away. But as he looked at Selara, standing next to him with her gaze fixed on the horizon, James couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Why had she chosen to bring him here? Why had the alien queen's daughter sought him out, a human of all people, for something so important? "Do you ever wonder what it means to belong?" Selara asked suddenly, her voice breaking the silence. She didn't look at him, but there was something in her tone that suggested she wasn't just asking for an answer. It was as though she was speaking her thoughts aloud, as if she were trying to make sense of something herself. James looked at her, unsure how to respond. "I suppose," he said slowly, "I've never really felt like I belonged anywhere, to be honest. I've always just kind of existed. I never thought much about it." Selara smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "I know what you mean," she said, her eyes distant as she turned to face him. "Where I come from, there's always been this sense of duty, of purpose. But even with all that, I've often felt lost. My entire life has been about preparing for a future that I didn't choose. And now, I'm here, with you. Someone from a place I've never known. Someone who has no idea why they've been brought to this world." James blinked, taken aback by her honesty. He had expected her to be more distant, more detached. But instead, she was revealing something personal, something vulnerable. In that moment, he realized that Selara, despite her royal status, was just as human in her emotions as he was. She wasn't some untouchable figurehead. She was a young woman, caught between the expectations of her people and the weight of a destiny she hadn't asked for. "I don't know why I'm here," James said quietly, his voice filled with a mixture of confusion and something deeper. "But I can't deny that there's something drawing me to this place, to you. I don't know what it means, but I don't think I'm here by accident." Selara turned to him, her blue eyes locked on his, searching. For a moment, the room seemed to grow smaller, the weight of their conversation hanging between them. She stepped closer, and for the first time, James felt a shift, a change in the air. He wasn't sure what to make of it, but the connection between them was undeniable. It wasn't just curiosity. It was something deeper, something that transcended the boundaries of their worlds. "I think you're right," Selara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think you're here by accident either. There's something about you, something different. I can feel it. It's as if your presence here is part of something greater than either of us. A purpose I still don't fully understand." Her words struck a chord deep within James, a feeling he couldn't shake, even as his heart began to race. Something in the pit of his stomach told him that this moment, this connection, was no coincidence. But what did it mean? What role could he, an ordinary human, play in the fate of an alien empire? "I don't know what's happening," he said, trying to find the right words. "But I can feel it too. And I think I need to find out." Selara nodded, her expression softening as she took a step back. "Then we will find out together," she said. "But be warned, what lies ahead will change everything. The path we are about to walk will not be easy. There will be forces that seek to tear us apart, enemies who will stop at nothing to destroy what we've built. But you and I, together, we have a chance. A chance to make things right." For the first time since he had been brought to this alien world, James felt a sense of purpose. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't turn back. Not now. Not when he had found a purpose and a connection with someone who had become more than just a stranger from another world. They stood together in silence, the weight of the moment heavy on both their shoulders. The fate of an entire galaxy was now linked to the bond between them, and whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The following evening, the atmosphere in the palace shifted. What had been a private meeting between James and Selara now expanded into something far grander and more dangerous. James had been told he would be present for a royal gathering, but the reality was far more overwhelming than he had imagined. As he walked through the sprawling halls, he could feel the weight of the palace's grandeur pressing down on him, each step echoing through the endless corridors. The walls, adorned with intricate alien designs, glowed faintly in the dim light, casting shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. The air was thick with the scent of exotic flowers, and the sounds of quiet murmurs and distant conversations added to the tension in the air. When they reached the grand chamber, James couldn't help but feel small. The room was vast, filled with beings from every corner of the galaxy, each one more imposing than the last. There were no ordinary citizens here. This was a gathering of the elite, the powerful, the influential figures of Selara's world. He was acutely aware that as a human, he was out of place in a room full of beings who had been born into power, who had ruled and fought wars for centuries. He stood beside Selara, feeling like an outsider in a world that was as foreign to him as the stars themselves. Selara appeared unaffected, her regal posture unwavering as she moved through the room, greeting various dignitaries and members of the royal court. She had a commanding presence, one that made even the most powerful beings in the room take notice. But James couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The glances he received from the courtiers were not welcoming. Instead, they were filled with suspicion and even disdain. He had been warned that not all of the royal court supported Selara's rise to the throne, but now, standing among them, and he realized just how deeply divided this world truly was. As they moved deeper into the room, James noticed the subtle but powerful shift in the atmosphere. Whispers spread like wildfire, eyes darting toward him with curiosity, judgment, and even hostility. It was clear that Selara was not universally loved, and many saw her return as a threat to the status quo. James, a mere human with no standing in this world, was an even bigger threat. He was an outsider, an unknown variable, and in a world where power and control were everything, that made him a potential danger. His heart began to race, and a nervous tension bubbled up in his chest. He could sense the weight of the situation pressing in on him, making his breath come quicker. It wasn't until they reached the center of the gathering that James truly understood the scale of the conflict at hand. Standing in front of the most powerful beings in the room was a tall man with sharp features and a cold, calculating gaze. His posture was stiff, exuding an air of arrogance, but it was the way the courtiers reacted to him that truly made James uneasy. The man, Raxos, had the kind of presence that made people listen without him even needing to speak. His reputation preceded him. Raxos was a high-ranking member of the court and had been a loyal ally to the sovereign for many years. But now, standing in front of Selara, it was clear that the loyalty was no longer mutual. Selara's face remained neutral as she greeted him, but James could see the tension in her posture. There was history between them, and a history that was as uncomfortable as it was complicated. Raxos had been one of the sovereign's most trusted advisors, but Selara had always known that his loyalty was not absolute. His ambition, much like the palace around them, was rooted in power, and power could be easily corrupted. "You've returned," Raxos said, his voice cold and devoid of warmth. "I wasn't sure you would, or that it would matter." Selara's eyes narrowed, but she remained composed. "I've returned to take what is rightfully mine," she said, her voice steady, but there was an edge to her words that James hadn't heard before. "And I won't allow anyone to stand in my way." The tension between them was palpable, and James could feel the air grow thicker with each passing moment. It was more than just a battle for the throne. Raxos was not just a politician, and he was a man who wielded influence like a weapon. And Selara knew that defeating him was not going to be as simple as reclaiming the throne. It was about winning the loyalty of those who had already been swayed by his manipulation. James stepped slightly closer to Selara, feeling the weight of the situation heavy in his chest. This wasn't just about surviving the political games of an alien court. This was about finding a way to expose the treachery that had been woven into the very fabric of the royal family, and James was now a part of that struggle. He wasn't just an observer anymore. He was a participant in something that could change everything. As Raxos continued to speak, his words laced with a sense of superiority. James couldn't help but notice the subtle flicker of something behind his eyes, something dark and calculating. Raxos wasn't just trying to intimidate Selara, he was testing her, pushing her to see if she had what it took to truly take the throne. And in doing so, he was testing James as well. The moment was tense, filled with the quiet weight of 1,000 unsaid things. Selara met Raxos's gaze with unwavering determination, but beneath the surface, James could see the cracks starting to form. She wasn't just fighting for a throne, she was fighting for her very survival, and in that moment, the reality of what she was up against hit James with full force. It wasn't just about the political battles or the wars they fought. It was about trust, loyalty, and the ruthless nature of power. In a palace filled with whispers and betrayal, Selara had one chance to prove herself, not just to her enemies, but to those who had always supported her. And James was now part of that challenge. The tension in the room continued to build as Raxos's presence loomed over the gathering like a dark cloud. His words had left an unsettling silence in their wake, and as Selara remained calm and collected, James felt the weight of the situation pressing in on him. He had never been a part of something so large, so intricately woven with politics and power. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined, and it was clear that what Raxos had said wasn't just a casual threat, it was a declaration of war, both in the political and personal sense. As the evening wore on, James couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening beneath the surface. Selara had always seemed confident, poised for a battle of wills with Raxos, but there was an underlying unease that James had noticed earlier. And he knew she was hiding something, a truth that hadn't been revealed yet. The air around her had shifted, and James had the sinking feeling that the kingdom wasn't the only thing at risk here. As much as Selara was determined to reclaim her throne, there was something far more personal at stake. After the royal gathering ended, and the courtiers filtered out of the grand hall, Selara motioned for James to follow her. Without saying a word, she led him down a series of narrow corridors, their footsteps echoing softly in the silence. The palace felt different at night, its grandeur muted by the quiet stillness that hung in the air. James couldn't help but notice the way Selara moved, her strides purposeful, but there was a weight to her movements that suggested she was carrying something much heavier than just the responsibility of ruling. They arrived at a small, hidden chamber deep within the palace. The walls here were less adorned, more utilitarian, with simple stone surfaces that contrasted with the grandeur of the other rooms. It was clear that this was not a room for public display, but for something far more private. As the door closed behind them, Selara turned to James, her expression guarded. "Sit," she said, her voice soft but firm. She gestured to a small table in the center of the room. James did as she asked, sitting down, his curiosity growing with every passing moment. He could feel the weight of what was about to unfold, and despite his best efforts to stay calm, a sense of dread washed over him. Whatever Selara was about to tell him would change everything. Selara took a deep breath, her fingers lightly brushing the surface of the table. "I need to tell you something important," she began, her voice trembling ever so slightly. "Something I've kept hidden for a long time. It's not just the throne that's at risk. It's something much bigger. Something that involves you, James, and Kale." James blinked in surprise, his heart skipping a beat. Kale? What did the alien wolf have to do with any of this? He had always known there was something unique about his bond with the wolf, but now, it seemed, everything was connected in ways he hadn't anticipated. "I know you don't fully understand the connection between you and Kale," Selara continued, her gaze meeting his with intensity. "But there's a reason you were brought here. A reason the prophecy has led us to this moment. The bond you share with Kale is not just a random event. It's the key to the survival of this empire." James's mind raced, his thoughts colliding in confusion. "A prophecy? I don't understand. I'm just a human. How can I be part of some prophecy?" Selara leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "The prophecy speaks of a human who will rise to defend the throne of the queen and restore peace to a broken kingdom. But the human must be bonded with Kale, an ancient guardian who has been waiting for the right moment to fulfill his purpose. The bond you share with him is more than just companionship. It's the fulfillment of a destiny that has been set in motion long before either of us were born." James shook his head, trying to make sense of it all. "This is insane. How could I, just a regular guy, be part of something like this?" Selara sighed, her expression softening as she placed a hand on his. "I understand that it's overwhelming, but I promise you, James, you are not here by accident. You and Kale are the key to saving everything. This empire, my kingdom, is on the brink of destruction. If Raxos and his followers succeed in their coup, Everything we fought for will fall apart. The balance will be lost, and the galaxy will descend into chaos. But with you, with Kale, we have a chance." James sat back, trying to process everything Selara had just told him. It was too much to take in at once. He had gone from an ordinary mechanic on Earth to a central figure in an intergalactic prophecy. His mind swirled with confusion, but beneath that confusion was a growing sense of purpose. There was a reason he was here. He had always felt like he was meant for something more, and even if he hadn't known what that was. Now, as he sat in this alien palace with Selara by his side and Kale's bond pulsing between them, he realized that his life had been leading to this moment. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," James said quietly, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I don't know if I can live up to whatever this prophecy is." Selara smiled softly, her eyes filled with understanding. "None of us are ever truly ready for the roles we must play. But you are stronger than you think, James. And together, we can face whatever comes next. You and Kale, you are the protectors of this future. We will fight, and we will win." In that moment, James realized that this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about something much larger. The survival of Selara's people, the future of the galaxy, and the unspoken bond between him and Kale, all of it was connected in ways he couldn't yet understand. But one thing was certain: he couldn't turn back. This was his path now, and he would walk it alongside Selara, Kale, and whatever allies they could gather. The battle for the throne had just begun, and James was ready to face it, no matter the cost. The quiet uncertainty that had settled over the room soon gave way to the harsh reality of what they were about to face. The weight of the information Selara had just shared with James was heavy, a burden they both understood but were only beginning to process. The prophecy, the bond between James and Kale, the impending coup, all of it hung over them like a storm, ready to break. Despite the calm words of reassurance Selara had given, that the gravity of the situation had only just begun to sink in. The palace was no longer a place of safety. It was a battleground, and the forces within it were far more dangerous than they had imagined. James stood by the window, his gaze lost in the view of the alien city stretching below them. The skyline shimmered with lights, but the sight that should have been beautiful only filled him with unease. Outside the palace there were already whispers, rumors spreading like wildfire. The sovereign had no idea how deep the betrayal ran within her court, but James was beginning to realize the true scale of the treachery that threatened them all. Raxos wasn't just a political adversary, he was a mastermind, a man who had spent years weaving his web of lies, positioning himself as the true power behind the throne. And now, he wasn't just fighting for control, he was fighting for survival. And Selara knew that if she didn't act soon, she might lose everything: her kingdom, her mother's legacy, and her own life. Selara approached James, her expression as resolute as ever. She had never been one to show fear. But now there was something in her eyes, a flicker of doubt that wasn't there before. She had always been sure of herself, always believed that her return to the throne was her destiny. But now, with everything at risk, she wasn't so sure. Her people weren't just fighting for her right to rule, they were fighting for their future. And if they lost this battle, everything they had worked for would crumble, and the galaxy would be plunged into chaos. She stepped up beside him, the weight of the situation pressing down on her shoulders. "We need to move." James," she said quietly, her voice steady but heavy with responsibility. "The longer we wait, the more Raxos strengthens his position. We can't afford to wait for him to make his move. We need to act now, before it's too late." James turned to look at her, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never imagined that he would be swept up in something so monumental. Just a few weeks ago he had been on Earth, fixing machines and living a quiet life. Now, he was in an alien palace, standing beside a princess who was fighting not just for a throne, but for the survival of her people. And he was part of it all. His bond with Kale had unlocked a hidden potential within him, one he didn't fully understand, but that didn't matter anymore. He had a role to play, and the time for questioning was over. "We'll do whatever it takes," James said, in his voice firm. "But we can't just walk into Raxos's den and expect to win. We need a plan. And we need to move quickly before they can stop us." Selara nodded, her eyes narrowing with determination. "I've already put the pieces into motion. My loyalists are positioned around the palace, ready to strike when the time is right. But we need to move fast. We'll disable Raxos's communications first, cut off his ability to coordinate with his allies. Then, we'll move to neutralize his forces. But I need you, James. Your knowledge of technology, of strategy, it's what we'll need to turn the tide in our favor." James swallowed hard, the enormity of the task settling in. He wasn't a military strategist. He wasn't even a soldier. He was just a man, a mechanic from Earth who had somehow found himself at the center of a galactic struggle. But Selara believed in him, and Kale, his bond with the wolf, had proven time and again that there was more to him than he had ever realized. He wasn't just here to survive, he was here to make a difference. "Okay," James said, nodding, "let's do it. We'll stop Raxos before he has the chance to destroy everything." With that, the plan was set into motion. They gathered their small group of loyalists, each one a trusted ally who had pledged their support to Selara and her rightful claim to the throne. The palace that had once felt like a place of security now felt like a ticking time bomb. Every corner held a secret, every shadow hid a potential enemy. The stakes were higher than ever before, and they had no time to waste. As they moved toward the heart of the palace, their steps were quiet but purposeful. Kyle walked beside them, on his presence a constant reminder of the power they wielded. The wolf, despite his earlier calm demeanor, was now on alert. The bond between him and James was stronger than ever, a silent force that pulsed through the air around them. It wasn't just the wolf's power. They were united in purpose, and that made all the difference. The deeper they went into the palace, the more they felt the weight of the conspiracy that surrounded them. Raxos's influence was everywhere. The guards, the officials, even the courtiers, all of them were somehow tied to him, directly or indirectly. But James knew one thing for sure. If they could take control of the palace's security systems, they would have the upper hand. And with Kale's power to disrupt the palace's technology, they had the perfect weapon at their disposal. As they reached the central control room, they paused, their hearts pounding in anticipation. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. If they succeeded, they could isolate Raxos and his loyalists, cutting off their support and turning the tide of the battle in their favor. If they failed, it would be the end of Selara's reign before it even began. James looked at Selara and Kale, his pulse racing. They were about to make their move, and the consequences of this moment would echo through the galaxy. There was no turning back now. The tension in the palace had reached a breaking point. With each passing minute, the stakes grew higher. The plan to disrupt Raxos's hold on the palace was underway, but something felt off. James could sense it in the air, the way the guards' movement seemed too deliberate, and the hushed whispers that echoed in the halls, and the subtle glances exchanged behind closed doors. It was as if they were being watched from every angle. Every corner of the palace now felt like a potential trap, a step away from disaster. Despite the precision of their movements, despite the strength of their resolve, James couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in on them. There was something lurking beneath the surface, a force even more insidious than Raxos's influence. Selara, who had led them with calm determination so far, now looked strained. The confidence she had carried into the palace had begun to fray. She knew that if they didn't act quickly, Raxos would have the advantage. But even more than that, she could feel the weight of the betrayal that was slowly unraveling around them. It wasn't just the palace that was under threat. It was her very birthright, and the kingdom she had once hoped to protect. Every ally she thought she could trust was now suspect, and the realization that her own people might have turned against her was a bitter pill to swallow. As they moved through the labyrinth of corridors toward the central control room, the atmosphere became more oppressive. The once grand and imposing palace now seemed like a labyrinth of deception, where every turn felt like a step deeper into a trap. Selara motioned for James to follow her as they made their way to the control room, where Kale's abilities would allow them to take over the palace's systems and neutralize Raxos's forces. They had almost reached their destination when it happened, the moment that would change everything. A sudden, unsharp sound broke the silence, an unmistakable clattering of armor and boots echoing down the hallway. The guards had arrived, but not the ones they expected. These were the elite forces, the ones loyal to Raxos, and they had been waiting for this moment. James barely had time to react as the doors to the control room slammed shut, sealing them in. His heart raced as Selara's eyes widened in realization. They were trapped. "How?" she breathed, her voice a mix of disbelief and anger. She had known Raxos was dangerous, but she hadn't expected him to be this far ahead of them. This was no ordinary betrayal. It was a calculated move, one that had been planned long before they had ever arrived in the palace. They had been walking into a trap all along. The very people Selara had trusted had turned against her, using her own plans against her. "We've been set up," Selara murmured, her gaze hardening with a mixture of fury and regret. She turned to James, her expression shifting from disbelief to resolve. "Raxos knew we were coming. He knew we'd try to use the palace's systems to our advantage. He must have had people inside, people loyal to him who tipped him off. He's been waiting for us." James, heart pounding, looked around the room. They were surrounded, and the walls seemed to close in with every passing second. There was no easy escape, no quick way out. The weight of their situation sank in as Selara's eyes narrowed, focusing on the control panel ahead. She reached forward, her hand moving with precision as she began to access the system manually. The fact that Raxos had anticipated their every move didn't surprise her. It was the realization that the betrayal ran deeper than she had ever imagined that shook her to the core. "We can still take control," Selara said, her voice steely. "But we need to move quickly. If we can get into the system before they lock us out, we can disable the palace's defenses and cut off Raxos's forces. It's our only chance." James moved to help her, standing at her side as he watched her work. The air was thick with the tension of impending danger, but Selara's calm determination was infectious. Despite everything, despite the overwhelming odds, he found himself trusting her completely. He wasn't just here as a pawn in a galactic game anymore. He was part of this, part of the rebellion against a corrupt system that had kept the throne from those who truly deserved it. He wasn't just a human from Earth anymore, but he was a part of something bigger, something that could change everything. He just had to help make it happen. But before they could take the next step, the door to the control room burst open with a loud crash. 3 figures stepped inside, their armor gleaming in the dim light. They were the last people James expected to see, the sovereign's personal guards, the most trusted members of the royal court. But now their loyalty was in question. They had come for Selara, and they had come for him too. Raxos had orchestrated this entire situation from the start, using the very people who should have protected the kingdom to bring about Selara's downfall. One of the guards, a tall figure with cold, calculating eyes, stepped forward. "You've been outplayed, Princess," he said, his voice calm, devoid of emotion. "Raxos knew you'd come for the throne. He knew your every move. You're finished." Selara stood tall, her gaze unwavering as she met his cold eyes. "I may be finished in your eyes, but not in mine. Not yet." The room seemed to vibrate with the power of the words she spoke. It wasn't just her kingdom at stake anymore, it was her very soul. She had fought to protect everything she had ever known, and now, with betrayal from within, it was time to fight for something greater. There was no turning back. The guards began to close in, but James stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no weapon, no training, but what he did have was the knowledge that Selara wasn't alone, not anymore. They were in this together, and together they would fight to reclaim everything that had been stolen from them. As the door to the control room slammed shut behind them, Selara reached out to Kyle, who was standing silently by her side, watching the confrontation unfold. With a single command, the wolf's glowing eyes ignited with power, and the room began to hum with the pulse of energy. The game had changed, and the battle for the throne was just beginning. The palace was no longer just a seat of power. It was a battleground, a place where the fates of empires would be decided, and where the struggle for survival would reach its critical moment. As the walls of the control room began to hum with a fierce, growing energy, James could feel his heart racing in his chest. The power that Kyle had unleashed was more than just a physical force. It was a signal. It was a call to action, a challenge to the forces that sought to destroy them. And the traitors who had infiltrated the palace, Raxos and his followers, had believed they could take everything. They had believed they could break Selara, but they had underestimated the power of loyalty, of a bond between people, and between a man and a creature who were more than just allies. James knew, as he stood in the heart of the palace with Selara and Kale by his side, that this was their moment. This was their chance to fight back, to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. The guards who had once stood as symbols of security now felt like shadows, their loyalty fractured, their commitment to Raxos weakening with every passing second. It wasn't just the power of the palace systems that had been compromised. It was their very sense of certainty. The palace, once a fortress of ironclad loyalty to the sovereign, now seemed like a house of cards, ready to fall with a single push. As the last of the royal guards entered the room, the air was thick with hostility, but there was also something else, something unexpected. The traitors no longer had the calm confidence they once had. They were nervous, their movements uncertain, as they faced the looming threat that had been set in motion by Selara and Kale's power. Selara stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the group of guards that now stood between them and the throne room. She no longer wore the mask of diplomacy. There was no need for it. The time for words had passed. She was done negotiating, done pretending that she could appease those who had betrayed her. She was the rightful heir, and now she would show them what it meant to challenge her. "You're too late," she said, her voice cold and final. "The kingdom is mine, and there's nothing you can do to stop me." The lead guard, Raxos's most loyal lieutenant, stepped forward, his eyes narrowing with rage. He was a tall figure, his face set in a grim expression, but even he couldn't ignore the underlying fear in his movements. He had been so certain that they would succeed, that Selara would bend to their will. Now, he faced an enemy he hadn't prepared for. "You don't have what it takes to rule," the guard spat, his voice trembling with uncertainty. "You think you can just take back the throne? You think the people will support you? You're nothing without Raxos." The words barely had time to register before the air around them shifted. Kale, the alien wolf, stood motionless, his glowing blue eyes locked on the guard. With a sudden, powerful movement, the wolf lunged toward the lieutenant, sending him crashing backward. The wolf's speed was nothing short of terrifying, and the guard stood frozen in awe as Kyle's raw power radiated through the room. There was no hesitation in his movements. Kyle was a force of nature, a living embodiment of the bond he shared with Selara and James. "Enough," Selara commanded, her voice strong and unwavering. Kyle immediately halted, his eyes still glowing, but now there was a calmness in his presence, as if he understood that the battle was not yet won. Selara turned her gaze toward the remaining guards, her eyes full of quiet fury. "You've betrayed me, and you've betrayed this kingdom. Now you will face the consequences." But before the guards could respond, a low, rumbling noise shook the room. James felt it first, the vibration that traveled up through the floor and resonated in his chest. He turned to Selara, his heart skipping a beat. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice tight with worry. Salara's face paled as she reached out toward the control panel, her fingers flying across the interface. The palace systems were still unstable, but this was something else. The lights flickered, and the air seemed to grow thick with energy. It wasn't just the palace systems reacting. It was Raxos. He had anticipated this moment. The traitors had one final card to play, and it was one that Selara hadn't expected. A hidden door behind the throne room opened with a deafening screech, and through it emerged a group of heavily armed soldiers. They were elite forces, trained for this very moment, and they had been lying in wait, ready to take Selara down before she could complete her mission. They moved quickly, surrounding the group in a calculated maneuver. Their weapons gleamed in the dim light, and James could feel the pressure mounting as the fight for survival began again. Selara's expression hardened as she surveyed the new threat. This was it, the moment that would determine the fate of everything she had fought for. If they couldn't survive this final attack, if they couldn't break through Raxos's forces, all was lost. The fate of the kingdom and the future of the galaxy would be decided right here, right now. But James wasn't afraid. Not anymore. He had seen too much to turn back. He had faced down the unknown, been thrust into a world that wasn't his own, and he had come through it all. And now, standing beside Selara, with Kale by their side, he knew they were stronger together. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for something much greater, for the future, for freedom, and for everything they had come to believe in. The battle began, and as the first shots rang out, the walls of the palace seemed to tremble. But this time, Selara wasn't alone. This time, she had the strength of an ancient prophecy, the loyalty of Kale, and the unexpected support of James. And together, they would face whatever came next, determined to reclaim what was rightfully theirs.